It was about 20 years ago that I was a student writer, and so it's kind of surreal to now be back at Meacham as a writer, a published writer. I thought I'd read tonight from my new novel, Summer in the South, which will be out in May. It's the story of a Chicago writer who, while looking for a quiet place to write her first novel, stumbles upon a 70-year-old murder mystery in a small southern town. It's called Summer in the South. "1919, Woodburn, Tennessee. Papa and John were in the stable killing rats. Papa had told Sissy and Fanny to stay away, so Fanny was sitting on the kitchen steps like he had said, but Sissy was squatting behind a camellia bush, spying on them. She had a big white bow in her hair that fluttered among the greenery like a bird. Tom Penny sat on Fanny's lap. He was purring as she stroked him, his claws coming in and out against her leg. Cicadas droned in the heat. They were feeding castor beans to the rats, mixed up in bowls of suet pudding. Fanny knew not to go near the bowls. She knew not to go near the castor bean plants, even though their flowers were like little India rubber balls covered in spikes, and their beans were speckled like tiny birds' eggs. "Don't ever touch them," Papa had told them sternly. "They will kill you quicker than a cobra." Across the wide lawn she could hear the thin wailing of her baby sister, Celia. Mother had gone to be with the angels not long after Celia came. The angels had brought Celia and taken Mother, and now Celia stayed in the house across the backyard where John and Martha lived with their dear little baby Clara. Martha took care of Celia and Clara. When she came to the house to cook for Papa and Sissy and Fanny, she brought both babies with her, laying them on a clean quilt on the floor. Sissy stood up in motion for Fanny to join her, but Fanny shook her head no. She always did what Sissy said, but Papa had said stay away, with his face all sad and stern, like it was these days since Mother went away, and Fanny could not bring herself to disobey him. She wondered if the angels would come for the rats, like they had come for Mother. Fanny cried all the time for Mother, but Sissy said, "Don't be a baby." Sissy never cried, but at night, in her sleep, she made little mewling noises like a kitten. This was in the nursery where they slept at the top of the stairs. They had always slept together in two little spindle beds on either side of the long windows, and at night the big house creaked and moaned around them, and the moonlight fell across their beds like fairies. Sometimes the fairies would lose themselves in Tom Penny's fur, blinking wildly until Fanny giggled. "Don't be daft," Sissy said. "There's no such thing as fairies." Sissy was a big girl now. She was too big for fairies and grief. Sissy was 8 years old, and she was turning into a boy. Any day now she would grow an appendage between her legs like a third arm. This is what she told Fanny. Any day now she wouldn't have to sit down to pee. Sissy was too big for fairies and grief, but she wasn't too big for magic. Down in the big kitchen, Sissy liked to pour pepper into her palm and hold the hand out to Fanny. "Sniff it," she'd say. "No, Sissy, I don't want to." "Sniff it." She always did. Later, when she was snuffling and blowing her nose into a clean starched handkerchief, Martha would say, "Lord, child, why do you always have to do what your sister tells you to do? Why do you let her torment you so?" Once when they were alone together in the kitchen, Sissy pointed to the big cook stove and said, "I'll bet you can't do a cartwheel from the stove to the table." It was a big, thick farmhouse table with a marble slab top. Fanny almost made it, catching her forehead on a corner of the marble slab and opening a long gash that bled terribly, while Sissy applied a makeshift tourniquet made out of a flour sack towel. Another time they decided to make a swimming pool out of an old iron wash tub they found in one corner of the garden. They filled it with water and then made a diving board out of a cinder block and a pine board perched against the edge of the tub. "You first," Sissy said, pushing Fanny out along the board. It teetered and dropped into the water, throwing Fanny forward so that she caught her knee on the edge of the iron tub, splitting the skin down to bone. They built a fort under Papa's bed, rolling around on the dusty floor, careful not to disturb the 4 legs standing in their little leads of kerosene, set out to discourage the bed bugs. It was dark under the massive bed, and Sissy lit a series of matches so they could see. Papa's dusty bottles of moonshine gleamed in the darkness against the far wall. His snake bite medicine, he used to tell Mother teasingly. When Fanny was bitten by a chicken snake out by the stable, Sissy carried one of the bottles down to the garden and dosed Fanny so liberally she couldn't stand. And when Papa sold the horses and carriage and came driving up in a gleaming new Revere touring car, they fed Papa's new pet with sand and rocks stuffed into the gas tank. Not long after that, their cousin Humphrey came visiting from Nashville, pulling up in the drive in a Fleetwood phaeton with a convertible top. He and Papa went into the library to talk, and Sissy decided the convertible top looked an awful lot like the trampoline they had been seen used by the trapeze lady at the circus. So while Humphrey and Papa were inside talking business, Fanny and Sissy were jumping up and down on the landau top until their feet went through and they were stuck and pinned like flies on cheesecloth. Later that night, while she was putting them to bed without supper, Martha said to Fanny, "Lord, child, why do you always have to do what your sister tells you to do? Why do you let her torment you so?" But Fanny just smiled and sucked her thumb sleepily, because she knew something that Martha didn't know, something that only she and Papa knew. Pain was part of love. After that, the family had a meeting to decide what to do about Fanny and Josephine. They drove to the house in a caravan to meet with Papa, following him into his library with solemn faces, while Fanny and Josephine crouched on the veranda outside the window, listening. Papa needed a new wife, they told him. Those girls needed a stepmother or a governess. They were growing up wild and untamed as spring colts. They needed a firm female presence in their lives. If they continued on the same path they were on, they were sure to bring shame and disgrace to the family. Papa listened and thanked them quietly, then sent them on their way. He never said a word to Fanny and Josephine, but several weeks later, a new governess arrived. She was a Frenchwoman from New Orleans. Her name was Madame Arsenault. She called Josephine and Fanny chérie, or ma petite, when Papa was around, and when he wasn't, she called them, "Hey, you, girl." If she heard Papa's voice in the house, she would hurry them through their lessons and go downstairs to smile and lay her hand coquettishly upon Papa's arm. Fanny liked her well enough, but Josephine had no intention of allowing a stepmother into their lives, much less a French one. She set about figuring out a way to get rid of Madame Arsenault. The woman had a fear of dark, enclosed spaces. Josephine overheard her telling Martha about this, complaining that the room she occupied at the top of the stairs was dark and airless as a wardrobe, insisting that she be moved to the back bedroom downstairs, closer to Papa's room. A few days later, in the middle of a history reading, Josephine let it drop that Papa had had all of Mother's things moved to the attic, where they were stored in large trunks, boxes and boxes of hats, shoes, and lovely dresses. Fanny watched in horrified amazement as Sissy spun her lies. "Don't be ridiculous," Madame Arsenault cried. "Why would your father put all of your mother's things in the attic?" "He thought the jewels would be safer there," Josephine said. "Jewels?" Madame Arsenault said. The next morning was market day. They stood at the window watching as Martha, dressed in a hat and a long coat, pushed Clara and Celia in the big pram on her way to town. Papa had left earlier to meet his lawyer. "What are you doing?" Madame Arsenault said behind them. "Come away from that window at once and get back to your lessons." She waited a few minutes and then went to the window, peering down at the sidewalk where Martha had disappeared just a short time before. "Stay in your seats," she said. "I'll be back shortly to check on your progress." They heard her steps along the wide hallway, and they stood and followed her, Josephine leading the way and Fanny trailing behind. They peeked around the doorway, watching Madame Arsenault as she stood in front of the attic door. She put her hand out and touched the knob hesitantly, turning it so that the knob opened with a slow creak. She leaned forward and pulled the cord, standing illuminated against the dim glow of the electric light. Still, she hesitated. They could hear her breathing. With a sharp intake of breath, she squared her shoulders and started up, clutching the railing with both hands. They heard her footsteps, loud and clumsy, on the wooden steps, and then the sharp sound of her heels striking the floor overhead. Josephine darted forward. She stood on tiptoe and pulled the cord, and the attic was plunged suddenly into darkness. She swung the door shut and locked it. There was a sudden howling like the sound of a dog that's been run over in the street, and then a wild clumping as Madame Arsenault made her frantic descent. She was crying, pleading with them to open the door. Fanny began to cry. Josephine said, "Hush, wait." At the sound of her voice, Madame Arsenault began to scream, "Open this door, you horrible child," followed by, "I'll tell your father," and then, "I'll strangle you with my own 2 hands," and finally a string of profanity so blue and explicit as to be unintelligible to the girls. It was at this point that Papa arrived, unlocking the attic door and swinging it open to the raging, disheveled Madame Arsenault, and without a word he went to his library and wrote her a final check, then called to John to bring the car to drive her to the train station. Thank you.